Martin Ba, agus Fáilte. Good morning and welcome. Welcome to all board members and those who are attending this meeting for some items today, and also to members of the public and to the press who are attending the meeting virtually today. We welcome you all. I'd like just to notify everyone that the meeting is being recorded for future upload to our web, and to remind board members and participants to use the show hands function to speak at the meeting rather than the chat function. Apologies, Ruth.
Thank you. Yes, we have apologies for the whole of today's session from Deirdre Mackay. And I understand as well that Alex Anderson and Philip McRae will have to leave early this afternoon.
I think Alex is leaving at lunchtime and Philip about 3 o'clock. Declarations of conflict of interest. Alistair.
Yes, thank you, Boyd, and good morning, everyone. I had considered making a declaration of interest in my capacity of being a Highland councillor. However, looking at the agenda as it's laid out and applying the objective test, I feel I don't need to do so. However, with regards to item 12, the revised Highland Partnership Integration Scheme, should that debate or presentation vary greatly from the papers and the recommendations that are laid out, I will at that point consider whether I need to actually declare an interest, and I will do so at that time if I feel I need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Any further declarations?
Can I come in, Boyd?
Is that Heidi?
It is, yes. So Boyd is a non-executive director of the University of the Highlands and Islands. I've checked the agenda to see if I have any conflicts of interest. There are none there that I can see, but I'll alert you if I think there's any issues.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any further declarations? If not, can we move on then please to item 3, which is an interaction with some members of our staff, and to recognise some of the wonderful work that is going on in all parts of our service. And today we're concentrating on the intensive care unit and the infection and acute medicine sections. And we've invited a number of colleagues from these departments to provide a brief outline of their experiences throughout the pandemic. Those joining us today are Dr. Jonathan Whiteside, consultant in intensive care medicine, Dr. Marion McKinnon, consultant anaesthetist, William Craig McClenman, assistant divisional nurse manager, Dr. Wendy Beadles, consultant in infectious diseases and clinical lead for infectious diseases, Dr. Rebecca Aqua, speciality doctor in general medicine, SCN Barry Forbes, senior staff nurse in Ward 6A, and SCN Sophie Bassendale, trauma rehabilitation coordinator. I understand that we are going to get I think it's 3 presentations today, but I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Whiteside to introduce his colleagues and to speak first. Dr. Whiteside.
Thank you, Boyd. Ruth, could we have the first slide, please? Oh, I think, Wendy, you're going to speak first, aren't you? And then I'll go after that. So this is Wendy's presentation. So Wendy will give an update on the experiences of the infection unit.
Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you. So yes, I would start by giving us an overview of the infection unit and the work of the team, particularly over the past 3 months. So we decided in the autumn time that we needed a different model for the care of patients with COVID-19 compared to the model we'd had earlier in 2020. And we wanted this to be a model where all the patients from North Highland were admitted directly into a COVID infection unit within Raigmore Hospital, with the benefits that that would bring around infection control and easy admission to the intensive care unit. So it became apparent over the Christmas period that we were going to need to put this plan into action, and we opened in the first week of January on the ground floor in Raigmore as the COVID-19 infection unit. We started that week with 4 patients, and this was a unit that had to have a high degree of flexibility because within 3 weeks we'd had to expand the ward up and we had 34 patients being looked after in the ward. We had admissions from all over North Highland, and we also had a number of admissions from the island boards, particularly the Western Isles. We had to work very closely with the intensive care unit, particularly around deteriorating patients and quick transfer to the unit. We did have to care for a large number of patients in our high dependency unit within the infection unit, and these patients were on high flow nasal oxygen. We had to consider caring for patients in all different situations with COVID-19, and so we were managing palliative patients on this unit as well. And as we'll come on to, we did have a number of deaths on the unit. It's dealing with patients with COVID-19 it can be very difficult around the fact that they're not having visitors in the same way as previously. And we set up a system whereby we had daily communication with the families, that the medical team would ring the families every day to communicate with them about their relatives on the unit. And we did get good feedback around this particular communication. Another really important part of the infection unit was our work, which has actually started back in March last year with the research team around recruiting patients to their trials. And myself and a number of the other medical team have been part of recruiting to the recovery trial, and we had the research nurses working very closely with us. And this has been really important. We now give steroids to all patients presenting with COVID pneumonia who need oxygen, and this is part of one of the outcomes of the recovery trial. And so we were looking at other drugs within that. We also worked very closely with the community, both with education sessions during these months for our community colleagues around when they should be considering admission of patients. And we also have a COVID follow-up team who's been really important and central to our work right back from March 2020. And this is predominantly now respiratory clinical nurse specialists who follow the patients up, and our patients were going home with oxygen saturation monitors to be followed up in the community and readmitted if necessary. And all the patients who'd had significant respiratory presentations, which was the majority of them, are all being followed up in a respiratory clinic, and this is work that is ongoing following our recent large number of patients through the unit. So we go on to the next slide. So team working has been absolutely paramount to what we've been doing. So this team was set up at relatively, well, at really quite short notice. The team of domestic nursing medical staff that was needed to do this, as well as visiting staff from infection control, pharmacy, physio and OT. And infection control has been absolutely central to the working of the unit, and we set up a lot of systems in order to make sure that this was central to our working. So we need to think about the full team here. I've just been onto the unit this morning to see a patient, putting on my full PPE to go in and see the patient in a very warm environment. We had, during the time when we had this large number of patients, everyone was wearing their full PPE for long periods of time, going in to see the patients and spending time within the rooms. And it became really important that even if you, as a doctor going in, you still had to take the water bottle and things with you in order to try and limit the number of visits into each room. So team working was really paramount to what we were trying to do, as was nursing leadership. And you're going to hear in a little while from the two charge nurses who have been involved with the work of the ward. And we also made sure that we gave daily updates, because there was quite a lot of rotating staff, particularly medical staff and some of the nursing staff coming into the ward. So we had every day we had a twice daily board round where we included the full team in that and fed back about issues around infection control and rehabilitation as we tried to get our patients home. Myself and Dr. Grant Franklin, who's trained in acute medicine and infectious diseases, were the two consultants. We really had quite a small team running our unit as far as the central medical team was concerned. And we also had our specialty doctor who has produced some data for us that I will present to you in a minute. And we did have other out of hours working, particularly from acute medicine and respiratory, which was very important. So if we go on to the next slide, I was going to just quickly present some of the data which shows what we've done through the unit in the last few months since the beginning of the year. So from the 1st of January through to the 28th of February, we had 135 patients admitted to the ward. Of these, you can see that wide age range with a mean of age of just over 60, and the lengths of stay of anything between 1 and 72 days. So we had some quite long admissions, and we also had patients being step bound from intensive care that stayed on the unit for longer periods of time. So the average length of stay was 8.2 days. And that pie chart that Rebecca's produced gives us some of the outcomes of the patients discharged, and does show that we did have a significant mortality of the patients admitted to the ward. And I think that this comes across in some of what the charge nurses are going to present to you from the point of view of the effect on the staff and morale and things of what was happening on the ward over this period of time. But overall, this is very much in fitting with what would be expected for management of COVID-19. On to the next slide. So where are we now? So we've got much smaller numbers coming into the hospital. We're seeing 2 or 3 patients coming in a week at the moment. But we do understand that we need to be prepared for these smaller numbers of patients ongoing. So vaccination has made a difference, and we're seeing people, particularly the elderly, who have been vaccinated some months ago now, presenting with much milder disease. And we've been looking after some of the elderly care patients that were transferred following the outbreak in the elderly care ward. And these people, the majority of them have had much milder disease post-vaccination. But we are still admitting very unwell patients, who are the younger patients in the 40 to 50 demographic, who have not had their vaccination or have only very recently had it. But we expect this to be ongoing. We need to wait and see what happens with new variants, as is very apparent from the media coverage of this. So in our preparation for that, we have kept open a red COVID infection ward, but a much smaller one, and we're working this alongside some general infection beds in order to use the manpower that we've got from an infection point of view. But as I said, this is really quite a small team doing this, and we're also reopening some short stay beds at the moment. So in the medium to long term, there had been some consideration about whether we should consider having a longer term infection unit, which would help us in the situation where we need a slightly different model of care going forward, in order that we can consider how we best manage things going forward and plan for future pandemic situations, and for the management of how we would be best to deal with flow into the hospital of patients with very infectious diseases going forward. And so we have been involved in thinking a little bit further about where we go forward with this, and planning within the reconfiguration plan had been looking at trying to set up a dedicated infection unit longer term, which would be able to support this vision of an infection unit, which would be pan-Highland going forward, which would hopefully put us in a much better situation if we had to do this again in the future with higher numbers, but also to manage smaller numbers going forward. So if I kind of summarize from my point of view, the words that come to mind from the work over the last few months are really that it's been hard work, but we've had a very dedicated team doing this, and it really has been highly rewarding as well. And I'm going to hand over to our two charge nurses who have very kindly looked at this further from a nursing perspective and are going to give them further kind of staff feedback that they have put together for us today.
Thanks, Wendy. It's Mary Forbes here. I'm the charge nurse of medical high dependency, and myself and Sophie kind of joined forces to run the COVID unit. And we decided to ask the staff for their positive and negative experience over the last few months. And we put it into a word collage, which I think really speaks for itself. The common themes that came through were the amazing teamwork and team spirit. They really stood out. We had so much positive feedback from patients, from relatives, and also from other staff that had joined us. There was one nurse in particular that had worked all over the UK in COVID units, and she said that ours was one of the best run that she'd worked in. So that was really nice to hear. I think everyone has been so proud to be part of the team, and it's been a very rewarding learning experience for us all. And I think the joy that everyone has felt when they've seen that 80% of people go home really made it worthwhile. I'm going to pass over to Sophie to go through the less nice points about COVID.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Sophie Bassendale. I'm the senior charge nurse of Ward GA at the moment. So yeah, as Mary said, and as Dr. Beadles has said, there was many positives to this experience, but you know, during a pandemic, as you'll all know as well, there's many challenges. So again, having asked the staff to tell us about their experience, this is just kind of, you'll see the main words that came up from each response. But I just want to go into a bit more detail about how the staff felt and what they felt the main challenges were. So these are actually some quotes from what staff have said. So feeling unprepared and scared for what lay ahead. Witnessing horrific situations that I've never seen before in my lifetime. The loneliest of time for patients, behind masks and gowns when even a reassuring smile or facial expression can't be conveyed. Witnessing family members not being able to say their last goodbyes in person, having to hold the hand of these seriously unwell patients, knowing that you're the comfort they need in their final days or hours. Watching patients deteriorate so quickly. Staff shortages putting pressure on us, making us feel that we couldn't fulfil our roles. Guidelines changing often as they had to, but making it difficult to keep up to date. And the pure exhaustion of working in this environment each shift, having to wear full PPE. So as we've kind of reflected upon all of this with our staff, they've expressed a lot of emotion, both positively and negatively. And there's, you know, certain words that have come out as they've expressed that emotion, including, you know, some of them feel a little bit traumatized by what's happened. So as a result of this, we've currently got staff support sessions running, and we've had great feedback from that. So we hope to carry that on and reach each member of staff. I think as Mary and Dr. Beadles have both alluded to, it's been a huge learning curve for us all, but I think it's shown the resilience and compassion for our staff, and we all remain hugely proud that we've been able to be a part of NHS Highland's response in fighting COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. I'll take over now and just give you a very brief rundown of the COVID experience in our intensive care unit. I think most people will be aware that unlike other boards, we only have one intensive care unit for the whole of the Highlands. So everything has to come through Raigmore. Next slide, please, Ruth. We're very lucky in Scotland that we have a very robust data collection system for looking at all the patients who come through, every patient who's admitted to an ITU, and the Scottish Intensive Care Society produce an audit report every year. There's been slightly different this year in that they've also produced additional reports relating to COVID, and they've broken the two waves down into the dates that you see there. All this data is in the public domain, so I'm not sharing any private data, although we do locally get daily reports of bed status and weekly reports of our activity. Next slide, please, Ruth. So this slide is quite a complicated slide, but in normal circumstances, there are 190 staffed beds in Scotland for intensive care, and I've drawn that as a red line. Now, this graph shows activity across Scotland from the 1st of March 2020 along to the end of February 2021, and you can see the blue area is the total number of patients in ITU beds compared to the baseline of 190, the red line, and the pink area is the total number of COVID patients in intensive care beds in Scotland, and you can quite clearly see that the two waves from last spring and then from the autumn through to this winter. Next slide, please. So we've got robust data on the outcomes across Scotland, and I think some of the headlines on this is that if you think that the normal intensive care unit mortality is around 15 to 17%, we can see that from the two waves for COVID, the mortality following an ITU admission is around 36 to 38%. Now, while that sounds horrendous, if we actually look at some other common conditions that we get through intensive care, such as septicemic shock, the mortality for septicemic shock is around the 30 to 35% mortality. So COVID, although when compared to overall ITU mortality seems to have a very high mortality, it does mirror some of our common disease processes, such as septicemic shock. Another point to make is that these patients stay a lot longer. So our average or our median stay in intensive care normally pre-COVID would be about 3 to 4 days, but these patients are staying 8 to 11 days, and that's putting an increased pressure on our beds. Next slide, please. So I will keep this brief. So I've summarised some of the local data that we've had through our own intensive care unit, and our second wave really took off in January rather than in August. So we were largely spared a lot of the activity in August and September last year that the Central Belt saw, but we were definitely over capacity in both waves. In the first wave, we had very little normal ITU activity. It was predominantly COVID work, and that made coping with the workload a lot easier. In the second wave, however, we had ongoing nearly as much non-COVID activity as we did COVID activity, and we have a baseline of 7 staffed beds in normally, and we saw our activity in both waves well over that capacity, as up to 220% of our baseline capacity. We managed to maintain our activity within one intensive care unit in the first wave, but we had to open a second intensive care unit in the second wave. I think some other clinical differences that we had in the second wave because of the increased pressure and workload, we saw our nurse ratios go from what we would normally accept as acceptable, a 1-to-1 nursing ratio to 1 nurse to 1 patient for a critical care patient. We had to go to a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3 ratio supported by staff who don't normally work in intensive care, and that really did take its toll on the staff across the whole of the first floor in Raigmore. We had to double our daytime medical staff capacity in the second wave. We had to move from an on-call system to resident consultants at night, and we have had some very long stay patients. The numbers are all self-evident in that graph, but our mortality largely matches the Scottish data. So we'll move on to the next slide, please, Ruth. So if we look at this is data from the last month, for the last 2 months. So I've drawn our baseline capacity of 7 beds in a green line across the graph, and the blue line represents the total number of patients in intensive care through January, and the red line represents the number of COVID patients in ITU throughout January and into February. What is of note, because we are a relatively small board in terms of intensive care beds, we spent most of January as the second busiest board in Scotland in terms of total numbers of patients in relation to baseline bed capacity. So we peaked at 220% baseline capacity, and only Ayrshire and Arran had a higher baseline capacity. We'll go on to the next slide, please. And of note, January was our busiest ever month since we started collecting data back in the early 90s. We would normally oscillate around the 40 admissions per month to intensive care, and January we had 55 admissions. So it was certainly a very challenging time for us, and certainly a very busy time for us. Next slide, please, Ruth. And this is just an illustration of how we've been working for the last year, irrespective of whether we have COVID patients or not. Everything we do generates aerosols, and we have to assume that patients are COVID positive until they test negative. And that means working in this sort of PPE and behind those negative pressure doors that you see that our Estates Department very kindly installed to allow us to protect the outside environment from aerosol generation. We have one of the most stringent testing regimes to allow us to move patients from a red or amber pathway to a green pathway of any board in Scotland, and I think that has served us well, because we are one of the few boards that has never had inadvertently a red patient on a green pathway, because our testing pathway is so stringent, and nor have we had any staff contract COVID through an occupational exposure. But it does mean working in that PPE that you see in front of us for prolonged periods of time, even if we're fairly confident that the patients don't have COVID when they come in. And next slide, please. So I did promise our chief executive that I would be brief, because I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. So I've kept it to well under 10 minutes. So I hope I've lived up to my promise. This has been a challenging year, and we've had to adapt to a completely new way of working. And I don't think we can go back to our old ways of working, but there has been a massive response from the whole organisation, and we have everything we have required, we have been provided with, and for that our team has been very, very grateful. I'll leave it there, and I will hand over to Marion, who is one of my colleagues and fellow consultant in intensive care medicine, and she's just going to give you a little bit of an update on organ donation, which miraculously has continued even throughout the whole COVID pandemic, and I think she's got some very positive messages to give you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny. Yes, I'm also one of the intensive care consultants at Raigmore, and I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk about organ donation during this last year. Just a little bit of background. Organ transplantation remains often the best treatment for organ failure. It can be life-saving, it's often life-changing, and allows an individual a vastly improved quality of life, able to contribute to family life and society when perhaps they were dependent before. In Nhs Highland, there are around about 30 patients a year who are in need of a transplant, and about 25 a year getting transplanted. Only about 1 in 100 patients will die in a way that allows deceased organ donation. This happens in intensive care units, and thanks to an amazing team, it goes on and happens in Raigmore. We know, however, that the success, any success in organ donation stems from someone else's tragedy, and it's a precious resource that we need to respect and get right. You'll have heard that we've been quite busy in intensive care this year, but despite the clear challenges, we've had the privilege to care for 7 multi-organ donors this year. Just to put it in context, that's the most donors that we've ever had in Raigmore. And just to avoid any misunderstanding, COVID-19 is a contraindication to organ donation. These are not COVID patients that are becoming donors. Being asked to do this presentation has forced me to reflect on the past year. I'm not one that is prone to navel gazing, but I think it was a challenge that's been worthwhile. And we think back at the start of the pandemic when we saw the images of China and Italy, and then the numbers started to increase here. There was a definite anxiety about what was to come and concern if we would cope. But this was combined with a real sense of common purpose. Across the first floor at Raigmore, critical care and theatres, between operating department practitioners, or ODPs, and our nursing staff in particular, all pulled together in preparation for initially, and then in caring for our COVID patients. And I think that the fact that we've had 7 donors in the last year is a result of this collaboration, this teamwork, and a reflection of our hard work that our organ donation team have been doing, and our committee, our organ donation committee, have done in the last few years, in particular our specialist nurse, Rebecca. In harnessing the goodwill of our colleagues who are prepared to go the extra mile, stay that extra hour or 6, to see that our donors receive the best of care, and that translates into the best outcomes for our organ recipients. There's also, however, an immense emotional burden that is associated with organ donation and caring for those donors, which has been borne by our clinical staff at a time when their day jobs, their normal jobs, have already been incredibly challenging. And I think the determination, professionalism and kindness of the theatre and ICU teams in Raigmore is something that I'm humbled by, and that is something that I think Nhs Highland as a whole should be very proud of. On a personal note, reflecting on this, I think it's a difficult thing to ask a family when they're at their most vulnerable if they would authorise their loved one to become an organ donor. And pre-COVID, over a short period of time, we were able to build trust, build a rapport with families, and through them get to know our patients as people. In the last year, we've had to do this over the phone when you've never met and you can't easily read non-verbal cues. And it's something that I've had to do in the last week or so, and it's something that I never want to have to do again. Our donor families have been amazing, stoical, determined, thinking of others when the worst has happened to them. So looking forward, if we have the next slide, I'm not going to miss this opportunity to mention that we need a new chair for our organ donation committee. We're adrift without Deirdre Mackay, and we need some new leadership. Although the organ donation, or the law regarding organ donation, has changed just in the past week, I'd also ask everyone on the call, if you haven't already registered as a donor, just please have a think about it, discuss with your families and loved ones, and record your decision, whatever it is, and work out what's right for you. This picture just shows us in better times when we were able to promote organ donation at Velodrome and the Black Isles show. And just in conclusion, I suppose, the most talks I do about organ donation focus on the importance of getting it right to honour the individual, for their families and for wider society, the benefits that it brings. And I believe that in the last year, in the midst of this awful pandemic, that grassroots, patient-centred clinical staff in NHS Highland did get organ donation right. Thank you.
That Boyd does conclude our presentations, but if and I'm conscious that you're precious for time, but we could take questions if there were any.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we absolutely must make more time for this. What we've heard today has just been absolutely phenomenal. I think Marion used the word humbling. It's certainly been humbling for me to hear your experience, and I think the word pride was also used in the presentation, and that's the overriding feeling that I have as chair of the NHS Highland Board, a sense of immense pride in such professional staff who have gone not just the extra mile, but way beyond that in confronting and dealing with this pandemic. I don't want to hog the conversation, however, and I'm going to hand over to others to make their comments before I come back in. But just to say that to Marion, that I have this little card, organ donor. I know it's a bit out of date now, but I think we should seriously consider the question that you've posed about volunteers to chair the organ donation committee. And Deirdre's not, unfortunately, able to be with us today because of family circumstances, but her view would strongly be that one of us should take on that mantle, and I certainly would be prepared to do that myself. But let's hand over to those who want to come in and ask you questions on your presentation. Jean, I think you're the first person.
Thank you, Boyd. I'm just wondering as to the wisdom of coming in here, because I do feel very emotional, and I thank you all so very much for everything that you've done and continue to do. My question is, well, how does the organ donation team feel about the change in the law with regards the fact that people have to now opt out of giving their organs? Sorry, my thoughts are not very well organised. Like you, Boyd, I've carried a card since I was old enough to know how to do that, and so my family are well versed in my feelings on the subject. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Marion, do you want to come back on that question?
Yes, of course. The legislation has been termed an opt-out, and certainly it's now a pathway of deemed authorisation. However, the team, I think I can speak for all of us, that really what we want people to do is actually to think about it, raise awareness, think about it, and discuss with your loved ones and share your decision, whatever that decision is. Because certainly in intensive care, when we get to that stage, sometimes with our families, they're in a very vulnerable position. And if the individual has already made that decision and made that decision known, then it's one less burden for a family to bear at that stage. The legislation itself isn't actually going to make much difference to our clinical practice. It changes slightly the way that we authorise donors. We don't consent in Scotland, we authorise. And it puts an onus of duty to inquire to us to see if that an individual, if they haven't made an express decision on the register, it makes us have a duty to inquire. And if there's any suggestion that that individual would not wish their organs to be donated, then that's fully respected. Thank you.
Okay, Adam.
Thanks, Boyd. Thanks to everyone who presented extraordinary presentations and amazing work. And thank you so much for taking the time to come along to speak to us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'm very interested and pleased to see that you've explored with staff both the very, very positive experiences, the satisfaction. I think joy was one of your words, but also, of course, the very challenging and difficult experiences that people have had. And I'm interested in the staff support sessions that you just mentioned in a couple of words, and wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about what those are and how they work.
Yes, Sophie.
Who's going to respond?
It's Sophie, the Senior Charge Nurse in GA. So yeah, briefly rounding up my presentation. So we've got 2 psychologists who we've arranged this with. So at the moment we've just run 2. They're team sessions and they run for about an hour and a half. And it's just really allowing discussion for the staff to come in and speak about, you know, what we've just spoken about, how they feel, their experience of working during COVID, and just to allow staff to sort of have that platform to speak about it, and then to be given advice on how to cope, you know, sort of, because, you know, with the best will in the world, you do take these things home. You know, it's very difficult when you're working under these circumstances to leave it at the door. And I think with the responses, that has really shown, you know, that a lot of things have played on a lot of the staff's mind. So yeah, these 2 psychologists have just been a great support, and have, you know, sort of offered support after the sessions as well. You know, if people want to be in touch. And we've actually got another one running tomorrow, and then from there we'll see how staff pick up, and we'll continue them as need be.
Thank you, Sophie. Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Boyd, and thanks everyone. I mean, it's been amazing just to hear what you're doing. Speaking of that, and I don't know who will want to answer this, but what one thing do you wish you had known that you know now back in March 2020 when you know the first wave, or even in January 21 when the second wave kicked in? And then looking forward, what do you think we should be taking forward into the, hopefully, moving out of the COVID situation back into normality, that will help us with our treatment of patients as we move forward? Thank you.
I suppose, Boyd, I could come and answer that.
Sure.
What one thing would we wish we knew? I think one of the things that we all saw what was happening in northern Italy and in China, and the health service being overwhelmed. And actually, we were very lucky with how we went into lockdown, that we weren't as overwhelmed as the health services were there. But I think one of the things that I wish we had taken on board is that had we actually just done what we always do and provided critical care in a normal way, rather than trying to predict whether we were going to be overwhelmed, then we probably would have probably had less stress and potentially been more efficient. But we all looked at northern Italy, and with our health secretary asking us to quadruple intensive care capacity, that was really quite challenging. We were very lucky that we only got to 220% capacity, but there is no doubt that the whole hospital had to reconfigure, and that was very challenging. But the take-home message is that by providing critical care in the same way that we always did, we've actually had very good outcomes for our patients, and we've got through largely unscathed, albeit being a huge challenge. Going forward, I mean, there's no doubt things will have to change. We will have to look at how we staff our hospital, how we provide intensive care going forwards, and there will be papers coming to the board on that going forward. But COVID is still with us, and we have to recognise that, because we admitted a patient 2 days ago with COVID who's now on a ventilator, and this trickle will continue, and we're not seeing any way out of the PPE or the new ways of working. So this is with us for many months, if not years, to come.
Thank you, Jonathan. Margaret?
Thanks, Boyd. Yeah, I just want to say it's always obviously a privilege to be part of the clinical workforce in NHS Highland, but I feel particularly moved and humbled, hugely humbled, in fact, by today's presentations. I just wanted to thank colleagues for sharing. It's not an easy thing to share. I think the work's exceptional, and you've shown the dedication and commitment that's behind it. And I'm sure only a small part of that. I think it's really important that this type of thing is part of the board's clinical engagement programme as things move on. I think it means a huge amount to the board and gives us a real sense of what's happening on the ground normally, but obviously on this particular occasion it's just exceptional. So that was all really. I think I'd just like to say thanks again.
Thank you, Margaret. Philip?
Yeah, thanks. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thanks. It seems so little to say thank you, but not to say it is unconscionable. The experiences which you've described and shared at times have been harrowing from your descriptions today, and over such a long and sustained period of time, it's clearly been a huge stress on all staff. So I can only again say thank you all, and I'd like to express the admiration and the appreciation of everyone I've come in contact who has got nothing but praise for the NHS and the staff locally here in NHS Highland. So thank you.
And I think it's a case of, and so say all of us, Philip. Fiona?
Thanks, Boyd, and I'd obviously echo everyone else's pride and thanks in what our colleagues do across Highland. A bit of a follow-up to Adam's question around the support for colleagues, and we know that this sort of pandemic of loss and grief that people are experiencing is going to be with us for quite a long time, and actually it's the focus of our Wellbeing Wednesday email tomorrow. But in addition to the support you've mentioned from psychologists, etc., is there more we can do as an organisation and as a board to help colleagues like yourself through this?
I wonder if William, our divisional nurse manager, wants to come in and make some comment on that. William?
Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, touching on what Mary said, we have intensive care, for example, have a quiet room, and they get support from colleagues up in New Craigs. I think what we've learned from the first wave is such an adrenaline fueled time. COVID, everyone's, the camaraderie, etc., is brilliant, and it's maybe the days, weeks, months following, when COVID starts to disappear and everything starts to come back to some sort of normality. That's when people and these psychological issues really come to the fore, and that's what we've learned, unfortunately, from the first wave. We had a number of colleagues who suffered post that. So I think I've been in touch with the trauma coordinator, psychological trauma coordinator from Nhs. So she is building up packages, etc. So I think the psychological support is out there. We know it. And I think we need to allow staff to process their thoughts, emotions, etc., and then recognise. I think the key is recognising when things are starting to have an impact. So far, everything that we've asked for, as Johnny said, has been made available, and again, it's this, from what I've learned from trying to staff the 2 intensive care units, is the great camaraderie and working across the first floor, but also the staff from out with Rigmore, like the PEF department, medical staff, etc., also supported the nursing side of intensive care during this time. And again, it's learning to keep contact, to make sure they're recovering post this episode. So yeah. All in hand, hopefully, but we know who to ask if not. Thanks.
Thank you. Before I invite Pam to close from our side, Rebecca, did you want to say anything particularly? So Rebecca Muted. Okay, we'll go to Graham just now. Graham's got a question as well. Graham Hardy.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions. Just like to congratulate the team and all the hard work and great work they've done. Very impressive, and thanks again. I was just interested to know, when you're dealing with COVID patients in intensive care, do you see different strains of COVID? And also on Europe, you were talking about Northern Italy and places in Europe. Are you slightly concerned about the talk of the third wave of COVID? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I can answer that, Boyd. Yeah, in terms of the strains, we don't get a breakdown of what strains we have. Essentially, I understand from Tim in Public Health that about around 10% of all positive samples go to Portendown and Collingdale for genomic sequencing, but we don't get a breakdown. We just, we deal with the clinical picture of COVID, and we haven't had a breakdown. So we don't know what strains we're dealing with. We're assuming that the Kent strain in the second wave is the predominant strain. And in terms of a third wave, I think we'd be foolish not to learn from previous pandemics that third waves are almost inevitable, although previous pandemics haven't had vaccination so widely rolled out. But I mean, I cannot see us not having a third wave, and all our preparation and planning will go towards preparing for that. And if we don't get it, all well and good, but we would fully expect that coronaviruses mutate twice a month, so there will be new strains coming through and new vaccines will be required. So yes, we'll plan for a third wave because that's what history tells us is coming.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we'll go to Pam then now.
Thank you, Chair. Just like everyone else, I want to thank the teams for what they presented this morning, and well done, Johnny, for the rising to the challenge. So I think it was a very coherent presentation, and I also had the privilege of meeting the team recently just to hear firsthand. And I think what struck me was the passion and commitment and teamwork, and that I think we've heard a lot about that. How the team really pulled together with wider teams, and estates were particularly mentioned on several occasions on that meeting, in terms of the support, what allowed them to be able to do their job. So what were the things that they needed to be able to do their job, and that the organisation had managed to rise to that. So that was really important. So I think from my perspective, Fiona asked my question, so I'll let her off with that. But the visibility bit, the purpose of starting to bring clinicians and frontline staff back to the board is I guess in some way to have that connection, and to hear firsthand how things have gone. I think the visibility bit for us is challenging, but hopefully in the weeks to come that will improve again, and we can perhaps between us all either connect in virtually to teams or connect in person where possible. But we will be looking at the whole system in the coming board meetings, so we will be bringing other parts of the system in to do the same. So this is part of a bigger jigsaw that hopefully will demonstrate the whole system of health and social care response to COVID. But I think what the team have presented today, and certainly as I heard firsthand, it's just excellent. And in terms of good practice, in terms of teamwork, in terms of acknowledging the challenges and issues, it's just fantastic. So I've got that immense kind of feeling of pride for them, because they've done it, and I'm glad that the asks that they had were responded to. I think decompression is a big issue for us. That's the word being used nationally, and I think I agree with Johnny that we are all kind of sitting with the thought that we need to be prepared that there could be a third, and likely will be a third wave. It's the size and shape of that we're not sure about. So looking after our staff, looking after your teams, and anything else you think that you need from us, don't be frightened to ask. Thank you.
Okay, and I would like to thank you, each one of you, Jonathan, Marion, William, Wendy, Rebecca, Sophie for coming along today and sharing with us so openly your experience. And there are no words that can do justice to your extraordinary professionalism and service and dedication. We have used words today like harrowing, humbling, pride, and I could add prodigious and phenomenal and other words to that, but there really are no words that can describe what you have done and what you continue to do as well. And I, for one, wish to thank you on behalf of the board, and I wish to visit you and meet with each one of you and your colleagues to thank you personally for what you have done to protect the people of the Highlands. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome to stay on for the remainder of the board meeting, but I imagine you have other pressing matters to attend to, Jonathan and Wendy and colleagues.
Yes, thanks. I think we'll buy out if that's okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And we now return to somewhat more mundane matters, such as the minute of the last meeting of the board, held on the 26th of January. And if we can go through that for accuracy, page 1, page 2, there's a typo there in section 3, line 3, row, it should be Queen's Nursing Institute.
Thank you, yes, yeah, thank you.
And page 3, is there anything on page 3?
Chair, it's Sarah. There's just a slight typo on page 3. Sorry, I can't find the paragraph now. It says COVID-10 instead of COVID-19.
Oh yes, I see it. In paragraph 6, fourth bullet point. And on page 4, I've got one which relates to Sarah. In second last paragraph, line 3, I think it should be unpredictably, can go up and down. Unpredictably, it was what Dr. Peters was saying. Anything else on page 4? Page 5. Page 6. 7. 8. 9. And again, it's in relation to Sarah's contribution in the middle of the page. I think it should be certain cases may not be clear cut rather than clean cut. Page 10, page 11, and page 12. With these changes, can we approve the minutes of the meeting of the 26th of January? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. And we also have actions, the action plan from that meeting. Ruth, is there anything there that you wish to draw our attention to?
No, there's nothing there I need to draw attention to other than the fact that the Public Bodies Joint Working Act Annual Performance Report is on this agenda, so that will be disappearing from your action sheet henceforth.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, any matters arising from the minutes? I'm not seeing any hands going up. So we move on then to the Chief Executive's report. On to you, Pam.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've got 4 items that I want to talk to. The first one is that I'll give you the COVID update on behalf of Tim this morning, in that we've got quite a full agenda, so I've incorporated that into my report. So I suppose that starting with testing, we're well below the sort of 1% positive testing across NHS Highland, and generally the World Health Organization sits at around 5% for when you're getting into a concerning territory. We've definitely seen a decline in positive tests. In fact, on Saturday there were no positive tests. I say all that with a huge caution, I have to say, because that's great and fantastic, but we know as we open up there are huge risks, and we will continue to urge the public not to be complacent and to stick with all the right measures that are well rehearsed within our society now. In terms of our vaccination programme, I think again another area of great pride, and I think there's a huge amount of people that sit around the delivery of this, but at the front of this programme has been general practice, as we all know, and we see frequently, and I see frequently on Twitter, the effort and passion, and again that goes into delivering the programme so far. And I'm pleased to say that today our number is 152,500 vaccinations that have been delivered. 57.2% of first doses across the Highlands, against the Scottish National Government, the Scottish average of 53%, and 11.5% of second doses against the 7% national performance. So again, really moving well with the vaccination programme, and the team that sit behind that link and liaise, whether that's the primary care team that work with the GP sub and others to get this delivered, or whether it's the planning team that sit behind that do an awful lot of liaison with government and try to keep us safe. There's a huge effort that goes around this programme, and I think we're seeing the success of that across what is a huge area and challenging arena to deliver within. In terms of our kind of rates of infection across NHS Highland, it's 10.3 per 100,000, and in single figures in Argyll and Bute. So again, not to be complacent, but we're in a good place. So from a public health update perspective, I think that's the sort of headlines that I wanted to give. Moving on then to a piece of good news for the board, which is that after initially not being prioritised for a new Vinci surgical robot, there were some reviews and considerations nationally. I had absolutely placed an argument that in terms of remote and rural access, for surgical procedures, that it was an important aspect that we were included in any deployment of robotic robots for robotic surgery, and that also in terms of being attractive to come and work in and for recruitment and retention, that this was really significant. And so as a region, as a North region, we made that argument, initially not prioritised, but I'm pleased to say we have been. And that we had our first Da Vinci surgical robot agreed a week past Monday and installed yesterday, good to go. Now that's the excellent part of the story, and probably one of the fastest capital injections I've seen. However, that does mean that we are on a back footing in terms of our lead-in time to use that, and that's well understood. I believe the surgical team are very excited about the delivery of their new friend, but it will take some time for us to stack up how this will be utilised, and that will be also done alongside the region, who, for instance, NHS Grampian, who will support us in some aspects in that they already have robots and have some of the capability and training and etc. Again, the Estates Department have been a huge part of this. Alan and his team have led led an excellent charge in agreeing this and getting this into place. So a big thank you to all the work that they have done in the background. Sometimes we forget about all of those in the background that actually make these things happen. So very good news story for us, and hopefully will secure the Highlands as in the right position as we go forward, and therefore retaining that attractiveness as a developing board. The third item I have is around flow. We have got cross-system challenges with flow, particularly affecting Raigmore and particularly affecting Caithness at times, and we continue to work quite intensively around that. Clearly the COVID measures in terms of infection control and our bed spacing we knew and has been an ongoing challenge for us, but it's certainly been more sustained in the last few weeks, and we're again trying to look at how at all parts in the system of admission and discharge we can improve that position or consider about anything else, any further action that we need to take. So that's a cross-system issue that we're dealing with. And the last thing I want to talk about is just a little bit about Lochaber and Caithness. So Lochaber, we are working with the community on a refreshed approach to looking at the future of the health and social care model in that area, and within that, the replacement of the hospital. And we have got a steering group up and running, and Alan is working with his team and others to deliver an initial agreement to be brought to this board in November. So we've got a very firm timescale in for that now. If it can be brought forward, we will, but at the moment that's the timescale we believe is the furthest away point that we will bring that forward to. And we will be looking for, under the sort of structure changes that Alan has made within his department and how he will run projects, Alan will be looking for non-exec representation on the programme board to work with him as an exec to lead that forward. The same goes for Caithness. We expect the Caithness redesign IA to be completed a little bit earlier, and Alan will keep us right on that. But again, for the programme board, he will be looking for some non-exec interest to be part of that. So those are just a couple of headlines to make you aware of. Clearly for those communities, these are really, really important developments, and they're very keen to progress with anything that secures, again, a sustainable and a reasonable level of service at a local level, which is what we're after. Okay, so that's my 4 items. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Are there questions for Pam on any of these items?
Yes, Boyd, it's Alistair Christie here. I don't know if my hand function's working, because I had my hand up previously, but I don't know if you saw it or not.
No, I didn't, sorry.
Okay. My questions, and it's probably unfair because it's a verbal report from Pam, so I'd quite appreciate if she wants to get me a written answer. But I'm very interested in the Da Vinci robotic innovation for Raigmore. Do we have any understanding as yet as to what that will mean in terms of the footfall that presently has to go to predominantly Aberdeen Hospital to get robotic surgery, and after is it going to actually absorb all the need in Highland, or will there still be some people having to go to outside hospitals? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Boyd Peters to answer briefly that question just now, but we will probably build up to give you much more information as time goes on.
Thanks, Pam. I was expecting that. So it'll feature in our strategic look ahead. So it's just arrived. The robot's only as good as the person operating it, and there will be a regional training programme now, which will enable the use of the robot. It can be used in a variety of types of surgery and a variety of areas of the body, but we need to take our first steps gently. So repatriation of patients who currently go out of our area but within region for operations could happen, but requires the appropriate surgeon and surgical team that can do whichever type of surgery it is. We do, however, have some real aspirations for that, but this is going to be a programme over a number of years to develop, and some of that will possibly involve recruitment. So it's a long way to go. It's exciting, but this is a really initial step, and it's a bit early to predict exactly what we will be able to achieve. I wouldn't want to commit to things today.
Okay, any further questions, Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Pam. Couple of things. The Caithness redesign stuff, I've been involved with it. I think it's an example of how well we can get the community involved, particularly in the early stages, to get the focus on what the community want rather than what we think they want, which was good. And we'll take that forward, working with Alan, to make sure that it's the simple things. It's the things like, have we got enough car parking space, rather than the robot, because that's what's important to people, and that's how we'll move forward. The other thing, again, it's looking forward a bit. When we open up, and I'm talking about in the summer in particular, we will inevitably get a huge influx of tourists coming into the area. I take it the team is all prepared and waiting, because that's where our third wave is going to come from. It's not going to come from anywhere else. I think it's going to be the tourist influx. And was that what we saw previously in the beginning of the second wave and the first wave? Thanks, Pam.
I think that's a really good question, and I'll probably bring Tim in, because actually last year we didn't see a massive impact from say the camper vans and that to the extent that we anticipated. However, we are clearly worried about that. And I think the other bit we probably have to think about is that, what happened over Christmas and where we had increased levels of infection was really about how we all, I guess, applied the flexibilities of Christmas. So Tim will probably say a bit more about that. What I have done, though, is next weekend, obviously, is Easter weekend. I've asked for an addition to our reporting to have some surveillance around what we see over Easter in terms of the split between, local presentation and people who are perhaps touring here, albeit that might still be breaking some of the rules. But we thought we'd be as well have surveillance on this sooner rather than later. And I've also, in my fortnightly meetings with the police, with Scottish Ambulance Service, Fire and the local council in North Highland, have asked, we are looking together at what that collective picture might look like to determine what else we might need to think about as we look towards the summer. And I'll be picking up the same with Pippa down in Argyll and Bute. So we've definitely got concerns, and we're trying to size some of that concern and get a flavour of what that might be. I'll let Tim talk more about the virus then and the potential.
Thank you very much. And just to echo what Pam said, we didn't see any big increase in COVID over the summer with the tourists. I think that one thing is that when people come here as tourists, most of the main reason that people come is for outdoor activity, and outdoor activity has a much lower risk of spreading the virus. We need to avoid being complacent, of course, but I think some of the risks are a little bit lower. What caused, or many causes, I think, for the upsurge in cases in January and February? I think two of the principal causes were, as Pam says,
Tim's frozen. Yeah.
But even more so than that, the arrival of the new variant. The new variant was mentioned in the presentation, and we saw we've got a greater proportion of new variant in Highland than in almost all other parts of Scotland, and the new variant spreads more quickly. So I think a combination of those things affected the second wave. We need to be aware of a third wave, and as has been said already, I think it's entirely possible that we would get one. we do have a couple of very important mitigations in place. One's the vaccination programme, and the idea of starting with the oldest and most vulnerable is that will have a really a huge effect on people being ill and people needing to go into hospital. So that's a really good thing, both for vaccinated people locally and also people who may be vaccinated coming in. Then also we have a very big testing program, and that's been hugely expanded over the last few weeks, in particular with an initiative from Scottish Government, which is now extended to the whole of the NHS Highland area, working with our local government colleagues for asymptomatic testing. So we've got a really big resource coming in there. And we don't need it at the moment, but what it's there for is that when there is relaxation in the restrictions, if we see an upsurge in cases, we'll be able to put a very big testing resource in there, and combined with other resources that we've got, we'll then have a much better chance to be able to control any upsurge in COVID.
Thank you, Tim. We've had a volunteer for Le Havre since Pam asked for it, and thank you to Jenny for that. And I suspect Alex will be volunteering anyway he's already involved in the Caithness one. So thank you both for that. And just to say that the presentation from the first session is now available. Ruth has circulated that. And also to say that was the picture from the acute services. We hope to have similar presentations from other parts of the service in future meetings. Okay, can we move on then to the next item, which is the strategic direction for 21-22 as part of Remobilise, Recover and Redesign. And it's over to you again, Pam.
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. So I suppose there's something kind of to set out here. We've for some time, and certainly the pandemic kind of got in the way of, I think, the work that was already underway prior to me coming in to NHS Highland around delivering a clinical and care strategy. And that is still something that we need to do. And we've discussed how we might do that throughout this year in an inclusive, engaged and clinically led, if you like, way, but also with the ability to engage with our citizens so that we road test our ideas. Just as Alex said, how do you get that balance between what's the absolute right and proper professional view versus what the ideas that the population can come up with and also can feed back on in their experience of services. So our plan is to work towards having a clinical and care strategy, or a strategy that's got the clinical and care elements within it for 22 and beyond, and that we'll look for that to be of a reasonable length. So we're mapping out the process by which we'll do that at the moment. As everybody's aware, we have been tasked with the remobilisation plan again, which has to be signed off by government. And we've been working on that and an updated version of that since before Christmas, and the first draft version went to government in February, at the end of February, and that has required us to engage with the frontline again around what the remobilisation looks for each part of the system, if you like. So again, a fast and furious piece of work that doesn't really afford us the level of engagement that I spoke about before. We felt that we also know that with those remobilisation plans, it takes some time for them to be published so that people can actually see what's been agreed and what's going on, because they have to go through a bit of due process, both locally and centrally, prior to permission being given to publish those plans. And indeed last year it was a few months before the plan was actually available for the public and for the workforce to see that kind of end product fully. So what we've done here is we've tried to pull out the key high-level actions for the next 12 months to give a sense of what's in the remobilisation plan and what the focus will be for the next 12 months. And that was done deliberately so that we have something that summarises, if you like, where we think we're at and what the focus will be for the next 12 months as we work with everybody to build up a proper strategy for going forward. So this is a real dive into this document is a real dive into the remobilisation plan, pulling out that narrative that hopefully can be used to communicate with people as to what our focus will be. We also plan with Ruth Fry, our head of comms, to consolidate this further into something that can be communicated with the public and can be communicated easily across our workforce. So the document that's before you has been pulled together to try and give the overarching narrative to the remobilisation plan, the detail of which people will see in due course. And this hopefully gives a sense of our focus, but is absolutely not a substitute for a long-term clinical and care strategy that has to be done properly and has to be all-inclusive and something that everybody recognises at the end of the day when it goes live. So happy to take any questions, and hopefully people find this a helpful summary of that.
Thank you, Pam. And we've had a considerable discussion of the strategy at development sessions in the last couple of months, which have helped formulate the strategy and finesse it. And there's still some work to be done in terms of just tweaking the document here and there before it becomes a published document. But can I invite questions or comments for Pam on the strategic direction, Rob?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Pam. I think it's really great to have this document here before us today. It's undergone a number of iterations, and it's been good to see the way the board has worked together with the executive team and the non-execs working with their own teams to develop this into what I think is a really good overview of the coming year and where we want to be going. So that's great to see, and thank you for that. I just wanted to ask, I think that Alex's points about Caithness and the car parking perhaps prompted me to think about the Chief Medical Officer's recent exhortation to us to address our responsibilities as regards climate change. And I think that's it's perhaps a detailed example, but nonetheless it throws up some of the challenges that we face in terms of balancing different needs when we address that issue. So I just wondered if anyone from the team could say a bit about how they think we can, over the next year, perhaps address that challenge that the Chief Medical Officer has given us. Thank you.
I don't know if any of my colleagues want to come in and say anything about what Anne's asked. Alan?
Hi, Anne. Just on the back here, we have to do a sustainability plan, which I'll be leading on. So it's in the format of a lot of pro forma documentation that goes right through the service on how you will be dealing with sustainability and climate change going forward, and obviously carbon reduction. So that will be our start point, is having our sustainability committee and making sure that we're getting all the evidence through working with all the different stakeholders to allow us to then have the plans. In regards to during capital works, it's a bit easier because there's a hard criteria you must meet now to allow to go alongside it. So just what you said, it brings in the challenges, like Alex saying in my eyes, you'll never build enough car parking spaces in any facility because you have the reduction on what you must put in due to the, you know, the sustainability aspect of it. So there will be challenges. I'm not going to say there won't be, but again, it's about bringing the right stakeholders round the table, getting what the plan is, and just bringing the plan forward, but also highlighting where the issues are within the plan that we feel that we need to bring forward, especially to the board, to assist on the direction that we're going on.
I suspect Tim and Fiona also want to come in on this item.
Tim first, maybe.
Thank you. Just quickly to say that that good health and sustainability go hand in hand, and things like active travel, good diet actually support sustainability. So if we push forward for things that promote health and preventing ill health, we can very easily do that in a synergistic, sustainable way. And there are some great examples of where that has been done within Highland, which sometimes have been world leading, like the in terms of dealing with waste, dealing with water stewardship. It's all part of what we need to do to improve the community's health.
Fiona?
Yeah, thanks. And I guess this gives me a good opportunity just to talk a little bit about the vision, objectives and values, which we've woven right through our strategy to help us kind of understand how we will go about delivering on the 9 key priorities that we set out, but more broadly the objectives that the board will measure its progress against, and the executive and senior management team will be aligning their objectives for this coming year to that. So under the aspiration of being safe and sustainable, we've got a protecting our environment objective. So it will be very important for us almost through each and every one of the things that we are delivering across the course of the year to apply that lens of sustainability kind of to that. And so I think there's a really good opportunity for us to make sure that both individually and collectively we do have that as one of our kind of key lenses.
Thank you, Fiona. Alex, you wanted to come in, and then Sandra.
Yeah, thanks, but I thought Anne still had her hand up. Does she want to come back?
I think we'll come back to Anne shortly.
Yeah, so thanks, Boyd. Yeah, it's a good document. Obviously, it's something that we're going to develop and move forward in the future. I'm looking at page 16 and the double challenge of population, and it's at both ends. We've got the demographic change of age and the increasing number of our aged population. But the one that worries me more is the fact that, and it's a historical thing, our younger age group is moving into the Inner Murray-Firth and the Inverness area. So that's where the work is, that's where you expect them to go. Have we got the capability, and are we focusing our capability to make sure that that population is also serviced properly in terms of GPs and all the rest of it, as well as looking at the demographic challenge for rurality and age? Thanks.
I suspect that latter point is a point of concern shared by Highland Council and their services as well, Alex. Pam?
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to that. There's the yes, where our population gravitates to, and do we have the right service levels for those populations. But I think the probably deeper question sits around economic development and what part we play in that with our partners as a very large employing organisation. And it comes back to, again, that building resilient communities kind of approach, and how do we contribute to that at a local level so that people perhaps don't need to gravitate from their local level because there's employment opportunities there. And you know, the demographic, as you say, that is usually difficult is the reduction in working age population versus people getting older within our population. And I guess there are opportunities in that. You know, not everybody wants to stop working, and people want to continue to contribute, sometimes quite well into their older age. But there is a challenge to us and to offer opportunities for people to enter the health and care system, whether that be in Alan's department through the estates or through technology, through eHealth, or whether it is indeed our clinical and care opportunities. And so the discussions that we've been having with Highland Council, I've had with Donna Manson and the other public sector, is how do we create those apprenticeships or those routes in to a career in health and care. And I more recently had been in discussions with the Centre for Sustainability that's been set up nationally as part of SG to look at care academies, those sort of things, with Nhs and that centre that's been established under Catherine Calderwood. So I think we will work with them to see how they can also assist us in getting that right. So I think there's a real broad opportunity here if we shape it right, and that doesn't stop people from flocking to the centres if that's what they want to do, but also affords the same equal opportunity to stay in your community and still have a career, particularly in health and social care. But we would hopefully make that offer across the public sector. So it is one that we're absolutely thinking about.
Sandra.
Thank you, Chair. Really just to re-emphasise our support from the University of Highlands and Islands towards the strategy, our willingness and commitment to actually help to make this happen. You'll see from the document we're already working with the National Treatment Centre to try and bring forward research and innovation collaboration, and we really want to extend that to as many aspects of the strategy as possible, but also just to follow what you were saying there, Pam, around educational provision, you know, for the university to help look at the gaps analysis and to help support the workforce, particularly in rural communities, by working alongside you to look at the course development, the CPD, whatever is required from a university, and very much working in partnership along all these different lines of joint working. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandra. Anne and then Margaret.
Thanks, Boyd. So I think, first of all, I think it was really good to hear the team draw out the different aspects of the issue of sustainability. And I think it is often something that we think about in relation to Alan's directorate. And well, I've learned today that we have to produce a sustainability plan, so that's good. But I think, you know, for me, the key thing is that in our strategy, in our longer term strategy, in our plan, that the sustainability issue is something that is seen as you know, running through clinical, public health, you know, state, all aspects of our system. So it was good to hear the team draw that out in response to my question. But I just also wanted to, I thought, prompted by Fiona's remarks about how we've tried to write our values throughout the document. And we were talking the other day about how sometimes it's quite difficult to articulate throughout to the organisation what we mean by our values and living our values well. We didn't and couldn't have had a better representation of that in practice than what we heard this morning. And so I think that is a really, you know, we can take inspiration from that, and we can use those stories to illustrate, you know, through case study or whatever it be. But though that's the living, breathing example of what we mean by living our values. So, and I think it's really important that we build on that as we try to engage with our staff about the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Margaret.
Thanks, Boyd. I just wanted to really welcome the one-year strategy, Pam. I think it's a really good move, and also for the clarity that this is not the clinical and care strategy, that it is indeed still to come. And just on that note, I just wonder if it might be helpful when the one-year strategy is communicated to staff. I think that there's perhaps a need for there to be a sort of staff-friendly short version of it. And I understand that's probably the plan, and that similarly for the public. But also that as communications go on over the next few weeks, that staff get a very clear message, as you've just given us today, about this is a one-year strategy and there will be a clinical and care strategy, because these things often get lost very easily and people get really confused about strategies for this and that, and it doesn't take much for people to get confused. So that was one thing. And the other thing was just to welcome the clinical engagement around the clinical and care strategy, and to ask that is right from the start of the development of the strategy, and not a kind of consultation when something's been written, so that there is that, I suppose it's from the ACF's perspective, I'm looking for the ACF to be able to fully carry out its statutory role, because I don't think we're quite achieving that at the moment. And again, I say that in the context that we're having discussions about committees and what they do, what they deliver, and how we use them. So it's all positive, really, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. I just want to probably come back on that. We're obviously in discussion at the moment about an extended ACF and well, Area Clinical Forum, stop using acronyms, and Executive Directors Group to come together to look at how we work together. But also a key ask for me there is that we formulate that process together in terms of how we take the strategy forward, and we're looking to get that date out probably for in May to give people adequate notice, and that is about us working much more proactively together as clinical leads and management leads to deliver this strategy as one aspect. That's what I'm after. So I think it's important that people know that we're having that discussion, and again that the plan is to do it in the way that Margaret has described, and not to create something in a darkened room that people get sight of at the last minute. So and just to re-emphasise, this 1 year is a consolidation from the remobilisation plan to try and give an easy narrative around what we're doing. It's nothing more than that at this point, but in the absence of anything, I felt it was really important that we had something.
Are there any further contributions or questions for Pam around the strategy? Don't see any hands going up. In that case, the recommendation is that we examine and approve the strategy paper for onward communication and engagement, with our staff colleagues will be important in this regard. Are we happy to accept that recommendation? See thumbs going up. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We're now slightly ahead of schedule, but I think we should take our break, scheduled break at this point, and maybe try to reconvene at 25 past instead of half past. So we'll have a full 15-minute break. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, I think it's time to restart. And first item we have, item 8, is the culture programme update. Fiona will speak to the papers that have been presented. There's there are quite a number of papers and quite a lot of reading for us on this particular subject, which is of course critical to the health of the organisation going forward. Fiona.
Thanks, Boyd. So I'd just like to kind of present a few points, and then we'll open up for further discussion and questions. So you'll see that we've now received the first 2 reports from the independent review panel of the healing process, and those are based on the accounts shared with them by former and current NHS Highland colleagues who experienced bullying up to the 31st of December 2019. And the report set out what the panel suggests we need to address to ensure the past experiences are not repeated and that the organisation moves forward. It's a really important step in our healing and in rebuilding the trust of our colleagues to publish these independent and external reports in full, alongside our report on progress with the recommendations to date. We recognise and accept the recommendations of the IRP, and we repeat our sincere apology to anyone who experienced bullying or inappropriate behaviour whilst working for us. With regard to the reports, it's important to note that while we've had time to fully review and discuss the first report of the panel, and obviously that's the more extensive report, we did only receive the second report in the week before the board papers were finalised. So whilst we have had an initial assessment of progress against the recommendations, that's not yet had the same level of broad engagement and scrutiny and input. And that is really important because of the broad and wide-ranging nature of the points it covers. So I just wanted to highlight that. I would also note that as the reports are produced by the independent and external panel, at times there will be small matters of accuracy, which we will feed back to the panel. A couple of people have noted to me that there's a comment in report 1 around the IJB not being a legal entity, and clearly it is, and it has its own governance framework. I think perhaps the confusion there is that the IJB itself doesn't employ colleagues, those are employed by the council and by the NHS, but I wanted to just sort of note that, and when we spot things like that we will feed that back. The healing process itself will close to applications tomorrow, the 31st of March, having extended that by a month. However, it is expected that the independent review panel will need to sit until the end of this year in order to get through the cases that are registered. We have committed that these reports will come to the board on a quarterly basis, so we would expect to see that through into early next year. As a board, we're now actively focusing on the future by learning from the past. So whilst noting that some significant progress has been made against a number of the recommendations, this is an ongoing, substantial and long-term piece of work that we will need to do to address this completely. As you'll have seen from our earlier strategy presentation, we're committed to making NHS Highland a great place to work through our culture programme and through the commitment of our colleagues and leaders to work in a kind and compassionate way with each other. And that was so well role modelled by our colleagues who joined us at the start of the session. We will continue to invest in the resource and the time needed to deliver the change in culture, and that is embedded into our 2021-22 strategy. We have detailed resource and budget proposals for this work as part of our remobilisation plan, which are being compiled and submitted over the course of the next week or so. The integration of our culture programme with our strategy is key. Culture is not something separate and standalone. It is about how we deliver and how we work every single day, every person in our organisation. So in line with this and our vision, values and objectives that we described earlier, our culture programme will be described through the phrase listening, learning and living our values. And we will be keen to bring those values to life through storytelling and role modelling. As we said, our plans are extensive and long-term, and we need to effectively prioritise the actions that will have the most impact for our colleagues, recognising the investment of time and resource, not just to design and to deliver this, but for colleagues to have the time to embrace this and to make this part of their day. It's been important that colleagues across the organisation have been leading the work streams to design what our key deliverables are going to be, but it is clear that in commissioning the work that's needed, we will have to bring in additional capacity to support this. This is the first of 2 detailed updates for the board. In May, we will bring back an overall analysis on progress made in the broader Sturrock recommendations, and we will also set out the detailed action plan for the year ahead with regard to the culture programme. We'll be noting longer term actions as well, because a number of the things that we need to do, like our clinical and care strategy, will be delivered over a period of 3 to 5 years. At the May board, we'll also present a detailed update on the healing process. We will from May as well be moving into a new format of reporting on the culture at the board, around more of a dashboard approach to progress against the plan with key risks, issues and deliverables. And we should have the first one of those as part of the May papers. And that's really important for us in just being able to present exactly what we've done, what we've still to do and how we're getting on with it. The final thing I'd just like to update on, kind of hot off the press, is that in line with our plans to deliver a baseline culture survey across the whole organisation in May 2021, we're in the process of commissioning a culture metrics tool, which will not just allow us to run this survey, but to begin to build a suite of insights and analysis across the organisation. And that is really critical to us in understanding what actions we need to take and to measure the progress that we're making and to see whether they're effective. So that commissioning process is just about to conclude, and we should have that system up and running in April, ready to launch the first survey in May. So I'll hand back to you now, Boyd, for comments and questions.
Thank you, Fiona. And now to colleagues to raise any points or to ask questions, and have Philip and then Gaynor.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks, Boyd. And I appreciate this is something that we've had assurance from the board from before, but in light of the IPR report, I was just wanting to update that, if you like. So the IRP reports and the accompanying appendices show a wide range of activities which NHS Highland and the board are engaged with, and I welcome all that's getting done and being achieved. But in relation to a specific excerpt from Report 1, which alludes to bullying continuing and being current, can the board continue to have assurance that where such testimony is received, there are robust processes in place to offer staff a route for action being taken?
Okay, thanks, Philip. Maybe to take a few points before I invite Fiona to come back in, and also the next contributor, Gaynor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Fiona. I think these reports are very valuable as they're from the independent review panel. So it's really interesting to see the recommendations there. Obviously, it takes a whole organisation to turn the culture around, and I appreciate that some things will be medium to long term. Really, in relation to recommendation 3 on page 64 in Appendix 4, I'm pleased to be able to say that the clinical governance arrangements relating to the Clinical Governance Committee have been evolving for at least the last couple of years. As chair of the committee, I was, and as a non-exec at NHS Highland, I was part of a short life working group looking at the governance arrangements for all our committees, and as chair of Clinical Governance Committee have been attending and building relationships with other clinical governance committees and other boards. So I think in terms of our scrutiny and assurance function, I think it's important to note that recently the committee had an in-depth look at our complaints handling systems and processes, and we receive regular monitoring reports on these, as well as the inclusion of indicators relating to these in the integrated performance and quality report, and we'll see this later today at the board. This has been a real focus for the committee over the last 2 years, and similarly in January 2021, the committee took an in-depth look at our adverse events and serious adverse event review processes and systems, and again receives regular monitoring reports on these in a variety of different papers that come to the committee. The committee has also asked for the inclusion of further indicators in the Integrated Performance and Quality Report. This ask remains on our action plan until they're completed, and this is specifically in relation to adverse events and serious adverse event reviews. So just to give you a feel for where we've managed to make some progress in terms of some of the recommendations included in the appendix. So thank you.
Thank you, Gaynor, and we'll take Sarah next, and then we'll come back to you, Fiona, for some response to the first three contributions.
Thanks, Chair. Not really a question, I suppose, just observations. Obviously, the papers are really difficult to read, really uncomfortable and distressing, but I suppose it recognising that will be nothing compared to some of the experiences that the paper relates to. And I think it's important to kind of pause on that for a minute, and I suppose also to reflect that I agree it's really, really important that we've had this and we can look at it in its fullness, but I do recognise that it will be hard for other people in the organisation to read as well, people who have gone through or who are going through a journey of change, and I recognise that is going to be hard for them too. I suppose just one thing to comment on, when we're reading the papers, I think we often want to look for facts and figures and kind of verifiable nuggets of information, and obviously this was quite different in the sense, I think what you said at the beginning there, Fiona, like about matters of accuracy and things like that. Actually, I think in terms of what we're talking about here, in terms of the culture, to a certain extent, or to me anyway, that doesn't matter actually. I think what matters is what that's telling us in the broader sense, and then there are it highlights things to do with communication, and there might be matters of accuracy that are wrong, but if they are wrong, then that's maybe highlights an area where we have failed in good comms and other things in the past. So I think it's important, and I know we are a group of probably largely scientifically minded people sitting around the table, and I think it's important when we're talking about the culture that we remember that it's not always about those corrects and incorrects, and it's about the kind of the broader narrative. One thing that I suppose, not a positive spin, but looking for opportunity, there was something actually in the whistleblowing paper, but I think it relates to this. There was a section in the whistleblowing paper that talks about giving feedback about concerns, but also suggestions and praise and thanks. And I think there's something that we need to explore moving on from this, and that's about that sort of appreciative inquiry approach, and it's cultivating that culture where we welcome people bringing us their concerns, and we also welcome people telling us what works well so that we can try and replicate it. And there was a part, I think it's on page 35 of the report, which really kind of sung true for me, and it was about, I'm scrolling down to try and find it now. Of course I can't find the paragraph now that I want it. So conclusion on page 35, and it says, we are conscious that this report is of its nature critical, but the intention that it was used positively to improve Nhs Highland as an organisation to the benefit of all its staff and its patients. And for me, that's the kind of takeaway that I'm taking from this. And I think, we've reflected on the difficulty in kind of the fact also that this will span years, and some of them will be old and some of them fresher. And I think for me, though, it's that we now sitting around this table have the opportunity to own this and take it forward and accept the recommendations in full and acknowledge it. And I just think that that's a huge opportunity. And sorry, that was such a ramble, but yeah, I really welcome seeing these reports, and despite the difficulties, I'm really pleased that we're seeing them in their fullness, and I think that that's been really important for us in moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Go back to Fiona for response.
Thanks, Boyd. And I've been writing down the information, because usually I scribble it down and can't read what everybody said. But so Philip's questions around, have we currently got robust processes, and are we confident in them around addressing ongoing concerns? Yes, I think obviously in any large and complex organisation, particularly with the stresses and challenges we have, there will be issues around behaviours and relationships. I think the implementation of the Guardian service as almost a bit of a safety net for us in August last year has been hugely well received. I think we've had over 100 people have engaged with the service in a in quite a detailed way to raise concerns and to have those addressed by the organisation, in addition to all of our usual channels that we've got around, kind of management. Our staff side colleagues are very important in this. So I think there's always more to be done, which is why, as part of the communication around the whistleblowing standards, we're having a much broader Speak Up, Listen Up campaign to really promote, as Sarah mentioned, the importance of knowing the channels to raise different concerns, and of when people speak up, that we listen. And I think that's a really, really important part for us, because there's no good in people speaking up if we don't then listen and take action as a result of that. One of the other things that has been a positive development is that, as part of our Once for Scotland policies that have been implemented, which all new kind of cases go through, we are seeing an increase in people taking up early resolution options. It's very difficult in some of the more long-standing and complex cases, but there's been a real support from management, staff side and HR colleagues to really promote the benefits of early resolution. And one of our key priorities for the coming year under the Culture programme is to work with teams collectively in building the tools and the common sets of values and behaviours to hopefully kind of address the root cause of these. The other questions, obviously, from I think Gaynor covered her point and didn't really require any input from me. I think Sarah's questions, I think it's really important that we take cognizance of what we're being told and accept that. And I think the healing principles that underpin our healing process are really important for us, because that's about taking into account everybody's interests and doing so in a kind and fair and empathetic way. It's not about making judgment, and it's not about blame and fault. This whole process is about us trying to address the root causes of what has gone wrong, and to try and make sure that we don't have the conditions for that to happen again. And I think, just to finish on Sarah's point around feedback and praise and recognition and appreciative inquiry, those are all really important parts of our culture, and we want to weave that into the Speak Up, Listen Up campaign as well. So, as you say, it's really important that when things aren't going well, people talk to us and we listen, but actually it's also important that where we've got pockets of good practice or stories of where things are working well, that we share that, not just that it's happened, but how it happened and what we can do to spread that.
Thank you, Fiona. Now for another three contributors: Alex, first of all, then Adam, then Bert. Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, it's a very complex issue, obviously, when you look at this, and the way I've tried to think about this is it's hard and soft. You've got the process driven, the bit that you described in response to Philip's questions, and you've got the soft skill bit, which is what Sarah was talking about. Have we got the hard bit looked at independently? Have we had audits of the process part that we now have in place, because clearly in Sturrock it was criticised in and of itself. So we've made improvements there. Look at that in terms of an audit part, and then get that looked at and say, yeah, you're on the right track, you're moving forward, you've made recommendations, you've got those recommendations closed off. That's the hard bit. The soft bit is the bit that really worries me, because we've got to get people buying into it. And by these reports, because people are saying currently they're employed, there's still issues. Have we got the buy-in? How do we measure that buy-in? And maybe that's your cultural analytical parts coming into it. But we need to get a wider access, if you like, to our overall workforce, so that we're getting the positives as well as the negatives. Because the people that have got negative impacts on this will speak up, because we're encouraging them to do so. We also have to encourage the people who have and have always had a positive outcome from the work they are doing within NHS Highland. That team that we had the presentations from this morning, clearly, although there was negatives, there was also an awful lot of positives. That's the kind of thing we need to tap into as well. Not so we're getting a false picture, so we're getting a more overall picture that then reflects the reality for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Adam.
Thanks, Boyd. Thanks, Fiona. Gosh, there's a lot to say about this, and it's quite difficult to get your thoughts in order, like Sarah. And indeed, some of the things I wanted to say, Sarah has said, but I'll have a go. Welcome the fact of the reports being provided and shared and publicly made available. That's clearly an indication of openness and acceptance that, you know, that there's still a lot to be done. Welcome the additional resource which Fiona touched on, because that will definitely be required, because there's many actions that we still need to take forward, and we will need extra resource to do that. Just touching on a point of Alex's, one of the many actions is about the need for joint learning from cases and between management, HR, and trade unions, and that's not something we've put in place yet, but that's one of the actions that we need to follow up. I think we've, as a board as a whole, we've done a lot, but there's still clearly lots more to do as well. And Fiona's emphasising that we're kind of on a journey on this. There is an impatience, though, for change, and in some places there's a view and a feeling that nothing has changed, or things have not changed sufficiently, and obviously that's still an indication that as I say, we've got lots to do here. That said, I suppose actually I do think this is quite an exciting moment for us, because the culture metrics tools that Fiona's touched on as well will be an important part of our information gathering and our feedback and our trying to hear from all parts of the organisation going forward. We've received obviously a number of reports where the recommendations and the feelings and the experiences are coming together and some of the learning identified in these reports is things that we are already aware of and have been working on. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be highlighted again. It absolutely should be, but I think that's represented in the Appendix 4, the fact that some of the recommendations, you know, that there's work going on already, but with all this coming together, with all the focus, with all the acceptance, with all the acknowledgement that we need to change, I think we're actually quite an exciting moment, and can now hopefully move forward significantly over this year and beyond in terms of improving the culture and improving experience of staff. And last but not least, welcome the fact that we're going to be getting further reports to the board in May in terms of progress updates and a summary of where we are with respect to the STORC recommendations as well.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Bert, and then we'll have a response from Fiona.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Fiona, for your input. I think the culture programme is the most significant piece of work that the organisation is facing right now. And there are lots of reasons for that. But just to repeat what the Chair said in his opening remarks, it's critical to the health of the organisation going forward. I welcome these reports, and I think it's been absolutely the right thing to do to share them publicly in the interests of openness and transparency. They make uncomfortable reading. There is no getting away from that. These are comprehensive documents, and some of the findings do not make for easy reading. And I suppose it's a concern to note that some of the testimony, as we've heard already, is about more recent experiences. And that's not to undermine or to diminish what has taken place in the past, but it's an area of concern that things still are happening. We know that from what the report is telling us, and we know that indeed from other sources. If I read the reports correctly, I think the panel interviewed 70 people, and the root cause analysis workshops interviewed 15. In the overall scheme of things, these are small numbers, and I think it's important that the organisation reaches out to undertake a current, up-to-date and fuller survey to get a sense of the sense and of the temperature of the culture at present. And I welcome the news that you have given us, Fiona, about this tool to carry out a further survey. But I think there needs to be very careful consideration given to how that survey is undertaken to allow us to get a representative view of the current situation. We've heard already that this is a long-term piece of work, and of course it is. And that will come. With that will come a lot of effort and a big commitment. And I've spoken in the past about the capacity to take this forward and to start making some positive change. And I'm pleased to note that you mentioned, Fiona, in your input that there are now detailed proposals to try and address that, so that the proper consideration is given to the investment in time and resources that will be needed. I think that's kind of covered everything that I want to say, other than, I think, just to reiterate what I think Sarah said and I think Alex said, about an important part of all of this is about learning, about how you take the learning, how you share and implement the learning, but also, importantly, in my view, how you sustain the learning, which I think is absolutely crucial and critical. So, uncomfortable reading though it may be, I welcome the opportunity to read the findings and for these findings to be shared publicly. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. Back to Fiona.
Thank you. Yes, so just to pick up on a few of the points made there, absolutely, you know, there have been hard process reviews that have learnings that we're embedding and are part of the investment in time and resource, but it absolutely is about how we get people engaged in this. And I think the really important thing that we can't say enough about culture is that whatever our role is, from the board down to, you know, sort of people on the front line, it's everyone's responsibility, and we have got to embed that across the organisation, because there are things that in our different roles that we can enable and support and deliver, but fundamentally each and every one of us have got to kind of you know, sort of agree and role model this, you know, concept of listening, learning and living our values, and really seeing what it is that we need to do to change the culture individually. We've heard through a number of the pieces of feedback that there is a sense from some people that things haven't changed, and we're really keen to understand the detail behind that. What is it that hasn't changed? How can we help? How can we move that on? But also, we also have to look at ourselves and say, well, if things haven't changed, what can I do in my role to change that? How can I start to show some of this kindness and compassion that we want to see? So I think our communications and engagement around this is really important. And I think the points around the measurement, yes, surveys will be very, surveys are always important, and we're working with a very experienced company in this regard, and some of the other organisations they're supporting with this are, for example, the London Fire Brigade, who post Grenfell and post some other significant cultural issues have had a similar, you know, challenge. So there's a huge amount of learning and a huge amount of data. But as you say, I think there's another part to this as well, about we need to make sure that we're finding opportunities to engage people across the organisation on an ongoing basis, not just through things like surveys. So, you know, how can we have panels of colleagues that don't just get involved in a one-off thing, but actually are part of our kind of test of how culture is changing, and making sure we've got the priorities right? Because, you know, the resources and investment that we've talked about throughout this, you know, yes, we can absolutely put resource behind, you know, kind of designing and delivering initiatives and rolling them out through the organisation. We've got to make sure that the organisation is given the capacity and to be able to absorb that, and for us then to kind of embed that into how we work. And I think that really is the key to this being sustainable. It's about how this becomes not a culture programme, but it's about how we work, how we do business every day, and how we all take our individual responsibility for that. And that's us all collectively. It's us working together, you know, kind of in senior management, with HR, with the staff side, and it really is about looking at all the opportunities that we can harness to make change.
Thanks, Fiona. Have another three contributors waiting: Graham, Anne and Margaret. Graham first. Graham Bell.
Yes, good morning. My question is, I guess, really for Pam, as our relatively new Chief Executive, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting you, Pam, but my recollection is that you believe this to be fundamentally a problem of leadership, not just at the board and senior level, but across the organisation. But it's certainly the case that the tone is set at board and the senior level, and it would very much be the case that I think we should be looking at the tone of our own communications as well. But having said that, I wanted to make or ask you about the stress and the link between stress and bullying and intimidation and so on. Often there's often a very clear link between the two, and the past year has been probably one of the biggest times of stress within the NHS in living memory, and I'm wondering how You know, going forward, how are we going to maintain the right tone, balancing that with accountability, and conscious that perhaps the stress of the past year for many people has been a galvanizing stress that's brought people together. But when we get back to normal, whatever that is, when we get back to normal, it's going to be back to the grind of you know, working through waiting lists and you know, the things that are hard and yet are really what makes NHS what it is. So I'd be interested to hear your comments on that. Thank you.
Do you want me to come in now, Boyd? Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Okay. I was actually going to come in at the end because I've probably quite a few things to say, but I'll try and be brief but cover hopefully the important points. So I suppose before I answer directly your kind of question, Graham, the important thing is that this is the most important thing for our organisation and for the health of our organisation. It really is. Pandemic aside, the way we work together, the way we are together is fundamental. There are many studies that show that positive, supportive, albeit potentially challenging environment is really important for good outcomes for people when we're delivering health and social care. So it's fundamental that we get this right and get it to the best level that we can. I think the just culture that's spoken about in these reports, you know, that what you're after is a proactive, safety conscious, informed and engaged organisation. There's just no denying that. That is absolutely what we're after. And yes, setting the tone does come through the organisation from the top. And so you have a responsibility at the top to, I actually don't like that at the top thing, because actually I am not a big hierarchy person. So but actually that responsibility and accountability that you live within and at an exec level, at a senior management level is critical in terms of displaying and demonstrating a way of working that's positive and respectful of people. And I talk a lot about working with difference. How do people become equipped to work with difference? We're a people organisation delivering health and care to the people, and that brings with it huge diversity, huge levels of difference, and somehow we're expected to come together and be able to deal with each other. I think looking at the past, and I have the privilege of writing bespoke apologies to everybody that requests that as an outcome in this process, and that is done by me and no one else because of confidentiality, and it's the right thing to do. And actually that's quite a sobering experience for me, and reading those accounts is harrowing and insight. I think it brings a lot of insights and allows me to really hopefully learn from that reading. I think the stress aspect, yes, this is a pressured system. I think it's a combination of it's a pressured system, and it's a combination of people are all very unique in their own ways that brings about these circumstances. I've worked with teams who were under severe pressure where the coherence was just wonderful and the support was wonderful. I've worked in teams where I've been under huge pressure clinically and had the support and challenge to be successful in that space. I've also worked in teams where challenge was not welcomed, and actually the health of those teams was pretty poor. So that questioning organisation is something we're after. So I think, you know, when people are stressed or are anxious, and often anxiety is something I've seen in my career is a big, if you're insecure and anxious, you may if I'm insecure and anxious, you may get the worst of me. And I think we have a requirement in what we're doing to support our leaders throughout the organisation to be able to be less anxious and feel more equipped to deal with what are often very difficult and complex and interrelational situations. So I think that's really important. So stress, absolutely, we have to be aware of the stress of the organisation and try to mitigate that best we can. But I haven't always seen that as the main indicator for where relationships have not been so good. I think the here and now one for me is hugely worrying, that the feedback that we're getting that, you know, people are still experiencing this equally, I don't think will ever be done, because we're dealing with people, and the situation will always be live and something we have to address. So is it still going on? From the feedback I've had, that would suggest it is. Is everybody coming forward and speaking to us? From the feedback I've had, there's an indication that they're not. And are the processes working at one level? Yes. Are we there yet? I would suggest not. So I think we have a lot to do in terms of being, you know, achieving that proactive, safety conscious, informed, engaging organisation where people are free to question, which is what we're after. Looking to the future, I think people have already stated the input and the support that we need to be given right across the organisation. And also, I think it's not just about, I've written down, it's not just about resources and pace, it's about the right resource, the right expertise. And that's something I've been discussing fully with Fiona, because we could say, right, we'll throw in a team there and a team there to do this and that. The expertise in these tricky, complex, interrelational situations, we need people that are highly skilled to manage that emotion, manage that stress, and support people to the right place. So we have a lot to do, but I think we've got good foundations. I hope that, I know that's a bit more than Nhs, but I thought rather than bring me in again, I'll just say it all now. I hope that's okay, Boyd. I took that liberty.
I can never constrain you, Pam. Got contributions from Anne and Jean. Anne, first of all.
Thank you, Boyd. So I have a couple of questions and some personal reflections on what we're discussing today. So I think, first of all, you know, a number of us have talked about how difficult some of these reports have been to read. And if our staff do read any of these in detail, then they clearly will also feel that discomfort and concern, and perhaps feel criticised by some of what's in these reports, and they may hear reports in the media, undoubtedly will do, about what's in the reports. So and some of these staff, you know, may feel that they were personally involved in some of the processes or actions that are being criticised. So I think as a board member, I wanted to just say to those staff that, you know, this is a failure of organisational leadership. Yes, inevitably, there may have been some examples of poor behaviour, but first and foremost, this is an organisational issue and a failure, and I include myself in that as, you know, as a member of the board, a failure of the organisation as a whole, not of, you know, our staff as individuals. That's how we need to see it. And I wanted to ask, therefore, how the executive team have been preparing and will be supporting the staff who perhaps do find what's in the reports very difficult to come to terms with. Secondly, I think that you know, we talk a lot about we're on a journey, and it'll be a number of years before the full impact of the many actions that were taken will be felt, and that's absolutely true. And you know, I noticed from the reports we have today that there are something like 5 recommendations fully addressed, a similar number yet to be addressed, and 19 in progress. However, I think that I'd like to ask Fiona if at the board meeting in May, the reports that we'll have will be able to identify clear milestones along the way towards these longer term programmes, so that the board can regularly check its progress as we move on, so that we can pick up quickly if we're going off track or not. In terms of just some reflections, I think that just one thing I'd like to just sort of say, you know, from a personal point of view, I'm sure those of us who have been on the board for a while many times have reflected on you know, mistakes that might have been made and things that we could have done differently ourselves. And personally, one of the things that I think perhaps led us down wrong tracks earlier in this process was getting caught up in the issue of numbers and how many people had been bullied, how many people were coming forward, whether that was a true reflection of how the organisation felt as a whole. And I think that in the early days distracted us somewhat from the fundamental that and quite a lot of people will not speak up if they don't have confidence in processes, and that, you know, one person experiencing the kind of harm that these reports demonstrate is something that we would want to be listening to and responding to. That doesn't mean that people whose experience is different doesn't matter, but all of these actions, I would hope, are supportive and looking after the well-being of all of our staff. And it's great that we're going to have a more in-depth and, you know, fully rounded tool that will give us the best possible picture we can get of the organisation. But that's just a personal reflection that I wanted to add from my own experience. And I think just to agree and pick up on what a number of people have said is that really there's no better demonstration than that some things have changed than the fact we are here today with these reports in front of us. And I often turn on the radio before these meetings with some trepidation, but it was good to hear that recognised by some colleagues on the radio this morning, and we thank them for that, accepting, you know, that this is a small change, one part of many changes that have to happen. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Jean and then Jerry.
Thank you, Boyd, and thank you, Fiona. The discussion so far really has been helpful for me to examine and acknowledge our concerns around the reports that some people are still going through difficulties in the workplace. And I wanted to express how much I like our value-based expression of listening, learning and living our values, and how important I see that as a vision to express our values as a board and as an organisation going forward with our culture improvement plans. I do have a question for you, Fiona. I'm wondering around the culture work streams, I was wondering if you could give us a quick update on progress. And I was also wondering around continual evaluation as to the fitness for purpose. And in you and your team's review, is the feeling that they can take forward the recommendations of the IPR, along with all your other work, of course.
Fiona will come back on that shortly. Jerry.
Thank you, Boyd. I think, as was said earlier, I think there is so much we could talk about in these reports, and As a probably relatively new board member, as everybody has said, they made very uncomfortable reading, but it is a reflection, I think, of where we are, that we're actually having this discussion at a public board meeting, which is 100% correct in the way we should be doing this. I think Fiona, in her introductory comments, spoke about the longer term nature of this programme, and I think that's absolutely right. And I was delighted to hear Pam talking about this isn't just any resource we need. This is about doing it right rather than doing it quickly. Although we have to be very cognizant of the timelines have to be very appropriate. I think what struck me most out of the independent review panel reports was our need to develop the feedback mechanisms, and I think that's going to be reflective in the discussions we're going to have later on about the whistleblowing standards, as well as how do we feed back to people, how do we evidence to folk, and picking up Sarah's point is right, because we won't have a suite of metrics that actually says we've moved from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7. How do we actually evidence that we're taking the actions that we genuinely believe will improve the culture? Because actually we're never going to be able to do a scientific measurement exercise of the culture has improved. It is actually going to be terribly subjective, and there will always, I think as Pam has said, there will always be people who will take a contrary view based on their personal observations, their personal interactions with the system. But I think we are in a good place. I think we have to just be careful that we don't lose sight of the actions which I think are highlighted in the appendix with the future activity and next steps, because not everything is captured in the culture programme. But I'm sure when we get the feedback at the next board meeting, we will actually see how they're going as well. So I'm not expecting any feedback in them today. So those are really just my thoughts, and I think the impression I am left with is we're on the right path, but we need to demonstrate to the review panel, to our staff, to ourselves that we're actually the path is the right path, and we're there. I really agree with Anne's point about clear milestones. I think that's really appropriate, and we have to think very carefully about the timelines associated with those milestones, because I think nothing would do us a greater disservice here than to overpromise, say we can do that by June when we just know we cannot do it by June, or even worse, we know we cannot do it properly by June or July or whatever the date is. So thank you, Boyd.
Thank you, Jerry. Back to Fiona to respond to these contributions.
Thank you, and hopefully I'll not miss anything off here. I think just to mention briefly around the points that Graham made around well-being, our well-being strategy, which is something that we'll be developing over the course of this year. The emotional, the psychological and the practical elements of well-being are really key for our workforce. And going back to our first presentation, our colleagues on the front line work under pressure, and we need to make sure that we're putting everything in place to support them, because that will that will help us. That is a key part of what we want to do. I think from Anne's comments, I think absolutely we have been very cognizant of the fact that our staff, and particularly some of the teams, so as the directorate that includes things like HR and occupational health, I feel quite a personal responsibility to make sure that we have been transparent with colleagues about not just about the report, which we've openly shared, and we've had a number of meetings over the course of this week to discuss that, but that we also accept and acknowledge that this isn't about us. It's not about our experience. It's not about what's right or wrong. It's all about us going back to the listening and learning and living our values. And I think that's important for us to be focused on. Let's learn. It's not about the intent that we had or where things have gone wrong. How can we learn? How can we do things better for the benefit of the organisation? And that's a journey I've been on myself, and I think over the last 18 months, I've I've kind of learned to pause and reflect and sort of think, actually, is this going to make it better, or is it going to make me feel better? And actually, if it's only going to make me feel better, then I just need to stop and can move on. And that can be quite hard when you're quite passionate about what you do, but it comes back to us, you know, kind of living those values and being very clear that it's not about our experience and right and wrong, it's about what we're being told and how we learn from it. With regard to the milestones and the plan coming back in May, absolutely, that's how we want it to work. We're at the point now with the kind of culture programme where we do have a number of key areas that we're going to be working on, and it'll be really important to us to break down the totality of that. Even if there are things that we are going to take 3 years to implement, we need to track what those milestones are and keep them on the radar, because one of the things we know as an organisation, if we don't put the marker in the sand, even if it's a very far ahead marker, if we don't put it in the sand and keep revisiting it, then other priorities will come along and we won't achieve it. So it's really important for us to have that plan with short, medium and long-term deliverables and milestones along the way. And that'll be something that we will revisit at every meeting. I think Jean's points around the culture work streams, absolutely. The culture, one of the reasons why when we talk about the culture programme going forward, really the culture programme, aside from us monitoring the outputs and the deliverables and how we're doing it, the culture programme is almost sort of sitting in the background a little bit, because actually it is just one part of our organisational strategy. And actually what's really important is talking about the what we're going to do and the how we're going to do it, talking about listening, learning and living our values and trying to make this a great place to work. That's the kind of language we want to talk about. But behind the scenes, obviously, we've got a number of people across the organisation working hard to develop proposals and to engage with that, and we want to expand that out. But I think it's important for us that we are absolutely focused on the what and the how. Just to sort of echo Jenny's points around feedback mechanisms, it's so important to us that we continue to build a culture where people feel willing to feedback whatever it is. And we know that from what's been written in the reports and from some of the experiences people have shared, that at times in our past that feedback hasn't been welcome or hasn't been sought, and it's really important that we do have that learning culture where we welcome good, bad and indifferent feedback. And not just that we welcome it though, but we're very clear on what we do with it, and that we use that to improve and to change our organisation. I think I have covered, hopefully, the points that people have raised.
Okay, Graham Hardy, you wanted to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Just having listened to this conversation, I'm just very impressed with the whole effort that the organisation is putting into addressing the cultural issues within the organisation. So I'd just like to say well done to all involved. Thanks.
Thank you, Graham. And I think that's the end of the contributions now from board members. Just by way of summarising and reflecting from my own point of view, I welcome the recognition that has been displayed today by board members of these deep-seated issues around culture that are still extant in our organisation. And I've been impressed, to use Graham's word, about the degree with which people are confronting that reality in our discussions today. I just wanted to say in the wider context of NHS Highland that we have had major transformational challenges. We have a transformational challenge around finance, we have one around performance, and we have one around culture. We have made really substantial progress on the financial one to a point where we have managed to break even last year, and where the outlook, as we'll come to later on the agenda, looks very positive for this year, which is a wonderful achievement. We have some distance to go in terms of performance, because that's something that has been impacted very directly by COVID, and there is a lot of recovery and remobilization to be done in light of the experience of the pandemic. But for me, culture still remains our primary challenge. And it's going to be an ongoing challenge. If people have talked today about a 3 to 5 year program, it will certainly be a 5-year program. May marks the 2nd anniversary of the Sturrock report, and that's a good point at which to take stock. And in taking stock, we have to take account of the views that have been expressed in these reports that have come before us today. One from the root cause diagnostic analysis conducted by our independent expert, Emma Pickard, in conjunction with, and that's crucial, the whistleblowing group, who were also instrumental in the setting up of the healing process, from which the other 2 reports before us have emerged today from the independent review panel. So going forward, we want to continue that spirit of collaboration to get to grips with the issues that have been again highlighted in the 3 reports that have come before us today. We have come a long way. Some people have criticised us about process, being too process-driven, and an analogy has been made between processes and behaviours as being hard and soft, and that the processes are the hard part and the soft ones are the behaviours. Actually, the hard ones to crack are the behaviours. The processes are easier to sort, but what we really have to address are the behaviours at all levels within the organisation. And to do that, each and every one of us has to be very aware of our own behaviour, our own conduct, our own interactions with people at all levels of the organisation. We aspire to be a great place to work, and that is a good aspiration to have. But to do that, we have to follow the mantra that we have adopted now of listening, learning, and living our values. We have done a lot of listening. We are doing a lot of learning. We have to do the third part of that, to truly live our values. Thank you all for your contributions today. This has been the report has been an extended consideration of the report today, of these reports. We were asked to examine and consider and report on these recommendations, and we accept the recommendations, and we move on now to consider how we implement these recommendations. And absolutely, we have to have targets and milestones at the May meeting of the board. Thank you all, and I make no apology for extending the discussion on this important topic. And related to that topic, we move on to implementation of national whistleblowing standards now, and Fiona's back in the seat again.
Thank you, Boyd. Yeah, it was a busy paper writing month for us. So I've just got a couple of points to make around the whistleblowing standards. You do have in the pack a very detailed update in terms of our progress on implementing the national whistleblowing standards on Thursday this week. As executive lead, along with Bert Donald, our non-executive whistleblowing champion, we felt it was really important for the board to fully understand the extent of the requirements of the standards that they place on us as a board and as a leadership team and on the wider organisation, as well as talking about progress with our implementation. So I know that it's a fairly chunky report. Going forward, we will have quarterly updates on the whistleblowing standards as set out in the standards. Those will be much more succinct, but I don't think we can underestimate how important it is that we all give this the right consideration and understand our own roles on such an important set of standards. As I mentioned earlier in one of the other sections, within NHS Highland, we will be running a Speak Up, Listen Up campaign over April and May, certainly, promoting the standards and helping people understand what they are, what whistleblowing is, what the role of the whistleblowing non-executive role is, for example, but also that broader encouragement to discuss any other sort of concern that people have, highlighting all the different channels we have and what to do when issues are raised, that listening part of the speaking up. And also under that, we do also want to start promoting that feedback culture. So more broadly encouraging people to tell us what they think, to give feedback and to receive feedback. And as we've talked about a lot over the session so far, this is a really integral part of listening, learning and living our values. One of the other things I just wanted to draw out is that obviously in the implementation of the whistleblowing standards, we are working very closely with our independent Speak Up Guardian service. And that's been a real benefit to us in being able to get ready to implement the standards against the backdrop of obviously a very busy and challenging few months for our system. The Guardian service is already really well established, as I mentioned earlier, as a route for people to raise concerns, and their support in helping us to provide a confidential contact point and in helping us manage the data and make sure that concerns are escalated and investigated and addressed by the organisation is a real benefit for us and has been really helpful in preparing for the standards. So without any further ado, I'll hand back to Boyd and obviously for any comments or questions.
Thank you, Fiona. And we have Bert with us, and he may wish to come in on this shortly. Bert is our whistleblowing champion. But first of all, Sarah, who's